Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
And we're going to talk about going from in-person to Zoom. A really strange concept.
Yeah, nobody's
ever
done
had
that.
to do that. Never.
No.
Never. Right
Brand
after
new
this.
concept.
Yeah. So this is a first. I mean, nobody has ever thought, why don't I take an in-person event and start doing it by Zoom instead? Right?
Oh.
Well, first of all, maybe we should explain what Zoom is. I'm sure our listeners and viewers are completely unfamiliar with Zoom. It's a brand new technology.
Yeah, brand new. We haven't had to use it in the last year at all.
No. Well, in all seriousness, it is something that's been going on a lot over the last year, and I think that Zoom is here to stay. As much as people talk about Zoom fatigue and all that kind of stuff, which we've talked about before, and the fact that I don't believe in Zoom fatigue, it's meeting fatigue, but that's not today's topic. Today's topic is how do you successfully, that's really the word we left out in the intro, it's successfully going from in-person to Zoom, because that is happening a lot less frequently. There's a lot of Zoom being used to completely replicate the in-person experience, where you simply take the same approach that you would do in person, the same schedule, and transplanting it over. And that's whether it's an event or a workshop or a consultation session or whatever. And the reality is there are some differences. And I thought, who better to talk about this than Gini Dietrich? Because I know that you have taken your normal 2-day paid discovery process and moved it to Zoom. So let's talk about how you did that, shall we?
We have, and we've also, which has been interesting, we've taken the crisis communications planning process and moved it to Zoom. And what we have discovered is, and you may have this experience as well, speaking. Like, I used to do 3-hour workshops for Vistage, and you can't do 3-hour workshops on Zoom. People just don't have the attention span for it. So we have looked at all three of those different opportunities in the last year, 13 months, to figure out what works best. And unfortunately, you can't get it done in one fell swoop. It has to be done over several weeks usually. You know, our 2-day strategy session used to be 12 hours over 2 days with, and with a lunch break included in there. And you can't do that anymore. So we've really looked at, and we've tested different things. We've looked at what works and what doesn't. What we have found most effective is 90 minutes is usually tops. And it has to be really engaging. So like for when I'm speaking, when I'm doing a workshop for Vistage members, it's 90 minutes, but you have to break it into usually 15 or 20 minute increments where you bring in, I love using the breakout session rooms and having facilitators for those. You bring in different activities that allow people to be engaged. You ask lots of questions, you do polling, you do surveys, you do all of that kind of stuff in between, and you break it up into those 15 or 20 minute segments. That's really the only way we've found that it works in all three scenarios. The strategy session, which we have now taken from 2 days to several weeks, crisis communications planning, and Vistage workshop-y speaking kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's break those out and talk about each of them, because they're things that we both have some experience in over the last year. So let's talk about the strategy sessions. And so first let's talk about what was your format before. So we've talked, I think, many times on this show previously about the fact that it's 2 days, but was it full 2 days? Were there meals involved? How did you sort of structure it, generally speaking?
Yeah, I mean, usually what it is, I mean, before 2020, it was 2 days of planning. And so you have everybody in the room. We would break it out based on leadership. So we would have the executive leadership team for the first 2 hours. Then they would, quote unquote, be excused. And then they would come back at the end of the second day. In some cases, depending on who the client is, maybe 1 or 2 of the leadership team would stay because they like to be involved. I've had several instances where the CEO has wanted to be part of the whole thing. And then the rest of that time is usually the marketing team, the communications team, however the client has their marketing, communications, and sales departments set up, but somebody from each of those groups would be involved in the rest of it. And we go through, I mean, the first 2 hours are really about business goals and financials and, you know, what they're trying to achieve both in a year, 3 years, and 5 years. You know, there are often very private, confidential conversations that I will have just with the CEO about long-term goals. Lots of times there's a want to sell the business, but the CEO may not want the rest of the team to know that, or want the rest of the team to know the timeline. And so I'll have pretty confidential conversations about that. But that just helps us, you know, plan, right? And then from there we say, okay, let's work with the marketing team, and we create the plan for marketing and communications from there. Then and then we kind of bring it all together on the second day, and then at the end of the second day we bring the executive team back in and we present it to them, and we get their buy-in. And from there we say, okay, this is how much it's going to cost. And because we've had all of the conversations about financials and budgets and all that kind of stuff, we know, you know, that they're not going to have sticker shock or anything like that. There's been one case where we were meeting with the client and we discovered that they had spent their entire marketing budget on the 2 days. And so we spent the second day, we spent the second day working with them to figure out how their team would implement the plan, because we knew they couldn't afford to hire us.
Right.
So we didn't even make that an option. But it allows us to kind of figure that stuff out in real time. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot harder to do that now on Zoom. A lot harder.
Right. So how do you do that on Zoom then? I mean, obviously, you know, you talked about that you can't do it all in one fell swoop, so it's not a 2-day process anymore. But, you know, how do you space it out? I mean, my experience has been as someone who did similar kinds of events working, or not events, but processes, you know, working with agencies. You know, there are pros and cons to splitting it out over a longer period of time, because it does allow some greater thinking and some feedback to take place in between them. The challenge is if you stretch it out too long, then circumstances can end up changing, and so then you're playing with a moving target. So to me, it seems like you have to spread it out, but still in a relatively compact time frame.
Yeah, and I would say the other disadvantage is the reason we like the 2-day strategy session is both because we get into the business really fast, but we also build trust really quickly. Right. And you know, with the executive team, and when you're spreading it out like that, or you don't have a really intense introductory planning session, it doesn't allow you to get that ramp up really fast. So I try to do it in 2 weeks. So we do a 90-minute session with the executive team, like on a Tuesday, and say on a Thursday, we would do another 90-minute session with the marketing team. Then we'd go back to the next week and we do Tuesday with the marketing team, and then Thursday with the executive team. So it doesn't end up being as long, but I think because it's more compact, we're not having, you know, the side conversations and the going to the bathroom, or, you know, some people would step out to smoke, or, you know, you don't have that kind of stuff that happens in the 2-day intensive anyway. So I think we can still get everything done. And it ends up being 6 or 7 hours over 2 weeks versus 12 to 15 hours over 2 days.
Right. Well, I think you make a great point there. You can get through the substance a lot more quickly because you don't have all of those sideshow type things.
Right.
The downside to me is that you lose the sideshow type things, which is where a lot of the relationship development happens. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So if you're grabbing a cup of coffee, you're having lunch, you're having dinner, you know, those are great opportunities to enhance that trust by building just a general relationship where you don't feel like there's a set agenda, something you need to focus on. And so that, I think, is the piece that you miss the most in virtual. And I honestly, looking at large events, small events, I haven't seen a good way to replicate it. I know a lot of events try these, you know, basically their own version of a virtual happy hour. I don't think I've seen one that's been truly successful. I don't know about you, but I think that's the piece that's a lot harder to develop virtually, that you can do much more easily and quickly if you're in person. Yeah.
And I would even say that we've tried to replicate happy hours with our friends, and it's just not the same, because you have, like, we have a friend who put together a whiskey tasting, like 3 weeks ago, and there were nine of us on Zoom. and you just can't have, it's not the same, because even though you're there and you're having fun and all that kind of stuff, but you're not having the side conversations. Like I might be talking to just one person and get really in depth, have a really in depth conversation versus trying to shout over the whole. And I think that's the challenge with Zoom is you almost all have to take turns speaking, right? You can't have the one-off side conversations. You can't have the one-on-one conversations. And I think you're right. Not being able to do that especially with a brand new client over dinner it's definitely, you're definitely missing that trust building for sure.
Right. I mean, I also find that there's a certain awkwardness to virtual happy hours because it always seems like half the people aren't actually drinking. And it's not because they're non-drinkers. It's just, for whatever reason, they're not comfortable doing it on camera or something. I'm not sure what. And honestly, I've been in that place too, where I've been the one which is if we were out in a bar, I would certainly have a drink. Right. Right. But it seems more natural not to. But then that creates a weird dynamic if you've got half the group drinking and half the group not. Then I don't know. It seems odd to me. And
well, sometimes it's at different times, right? Like you may do
yes, of course.
You may do a happy hour at 6:00 your time, but it's 3:00 on the West Coast. Right. I can't drink at 3:00 in the afternoon. I mean, I can, but I shouldn't.
Right. Right. But again, if you were in person, that wouldn't be an issue. Everybody would be at the same time.
Correct.
Right. Because there's no metaphysical thing that allows you to have different times in the same restaurant that I'm aware of, at least. Although with this new discovery about muons or something that I saw the other day, there's some new laws of physics. I don't know. So maybe it's possible, and I just don't realize it. So, but okay. So that's sort of how you've done that process. And so, what is your expectation as you're able to get back to in person? Do you plan to move them to in person? Do you plan to continue doing it virtually? Is it going to depend upon the client? What's your thought process as you look into that crystal ball?
Right now, I don't see us going back to in person anytime soon. Mostly because it costs a lot more money, right? They have to fly my team and I to wherever. They have to pay for hotels and meals and all that, and they don't have to do any of that if we're on Zoom. And I feel like, with the exception of some of the disadvantages that we've talked about, I don't think that anybody's willing to pay a premium for to get rid of those disadvantages. We get the work done. It works just as well.
Right. So,
and truth be told, I'm not super keen on getting on a plane and doing all that right now anyway. Of course, I haven't been vaccinated yet because me and the 16-year-olds are still waiting.
Well, but that's because you're pretty close in age to a 16-year-old. So.
Yeah, no, it's not true.
No? Well, I thought maybe that'd get me a few brownie points so that I can be snarky about something else at some other point. It was a try. What can I do?
It was a try.
All right. So that's one kind of in-person to virtual transition. Let's talk about events more broadly and being a speaker or a workshop presenter in that environment and your experience with that. I think, the consultative strategy session type stuff is much more straightforward to migrate. I think when you start talking about workshops and events, it's a lot more ragged. I've seen some good workshops. I don't think I've seen any good large-scale events. I think almost all of the large-scale events that I've seen virtually or been part of have been mediocre at best. Some of them have been just terrible, right?
Yeah,
some of them just feel like 2-day-long webinars that you just don't want a part of. And people are trying a lot of different things. I just haven't seen at the large scale event anything that's solved. So let's start with workshops and smaller group things first, because I think that's a little bit more akin to those strategy sessions, and I think there are more opportunities to get those right. Yeah.
So I speak for Vistage a lot, and it's a great lead generator for those of you who are interested. It generates a ton of leads. But it used to be that they would pay $600 in a speaking fee, and then all of your travel expenses, which is not a lot of money. But I always looked at it as new business because it generates a ton of leads. But I was always gone for 2 days at least. And what I would try to do is, if I were in Fort Lauderdale, for instance, I would try to do 2 or 3 days of speaking to different groups there. And that, so I'd get a big bang for the buck. But now, because they're not paying for travel, they've been able to amp up the speaking fee, which is great. And I don't have to get on a plane, right? It's instead of me spending 2 or 3 or 4 days somewhere, I get to spend 90 minutes, of course, preparation, but 90 minutes, and then I'm done and I'm making more money. So we've certainly in the last year have tried different things. And at first we did try to just say, okay, I'll just do it like I would if I were in person, and it's 3 hours and we'll have breaks, and it doesn't work. So I did one 3 weeks ago and it was phenomenal. So what we did was we said, okay, it's gonna be 90 minutes. Here's the topic. Here's what we're gonna do. But we're gonna break it up. And we did it in 20-minute segments. So, which by the way, it's really hard to plan a speech that way.
Yeah.
It's really hard. So we would do 20 minutes, but then we would have breakout sessions. And I had a facilitator there were 4 breakout rooms, and I had a facilitator for each of those rooms, and they would talk about the things that we had just discussed and started to craft a plan for their businesses. So by the end of the 90 minutes, it was about an hour, it was not quite 2 hours, it was about an hour and 45 minutes. By the end of that, they had a plan for and we had talked about values-based marketing. And one of the big challenges I think business owners are really thinking about right now is, we keep having these instances where we have to talk about our stance on social injustice, or we have to talk about, our stance on George Floyd, or we have to talk about our stance on the Capitol coup, or, whatever it happens to be, but we don't really know how to maintain that and how to continue to talk about our values. And so the conversation was about values-based marketing. So at the end of it, because we had these breakout sessions and I had a facilitator for each of the rooms, they each had a plan that they could go implement afterwards. And in some cases, some of them were like, yeah, I have a marketing team, I'm going to go do it, and this is great. And in 2 cases, I had 2 of them come to me and say, can you help us do this? So It worked really well. And like the large events, we're just tweaking and trying and, trying to figure out what works and what keeps people engaged. But I will tell you that having somebody sit there for an hour and a half just while you drone on does not work.
Right. Yeah. I think really the key to those smaller group events is to get that interactivity in there, to have either breakout sessions or just, keep them small to begin with, so that you can have, just a few dozen people and everybody can see each other on Zoom or something like that. And it has a lot more of that interactive feeling and a lot less of the webinar, just talking to the camera. And by the way, even if you're doing a webinar, put yourself on camera. I mean, we are all at that point now where we're used to seeing that. So I've seen a couple of webinars in the last few months where people are still just doing the slide with the voice. Like, no, right? Stop it. Yeah. I mean, honestly, a lot of webinars could be done without any slides and just put yourself on the screen, right? Make it that more engaging, personal connection with the audience. And I think that that's key. But now let's talk about the larger scale events. When you're talking about, like the PRSA icon or things like that, where you typically have thousands of attendees, and a lot of those events have gone to the virtual format. Mm-hmm. Initially, I think a lot of them really did try to just replicate the same, let's just take that in-person agenda and we're going to do the exact same thing online, which I think is a miserable failure. Yeah. Nobody wants to spend 2 days sitting there and watching what are effectively webinars right, for 2 straight days. And by the way, if you're doing that, you can't charge as much. Right. I've seen a lot of event organizers try to charge the same amount for that versus the in-person experience. I'm sorry. I realize that you're an event revenue organization. Doesn't work. Right. And I'm not speaking to PRSA here. I'm speaking generally. Right. So, you have to be able to do that at a more affordable price for attendees, because they're not going to be willing to do it. You also have to remember that if you're doing it in a really compact time frame like that, where it's just over 2 days, people are going to get distracted. Right. First of all, if they're in the conference hall, they're probably distracted anyway. Right. So I think there's this misconception that people are fully focused on the speaker. No. Right? I don't think I've been to a conference in the last 15 years where people weren't on their phones and typing stuff out or had their laptops out or whatever. people also wander out into the hallways. They come and they go.
Yep.
And I've seen some event organizers who get really irked that people are not there all the time. Guess what? They're not there all the time for in-person events either. So
No,
get over it. Get over it.
No, they're not.
But so I think that those events they're doing an okay job of conveying the same information that they conveyed. The problem is that a lot of people go to events for reasons other than the information being conveyed, right? Most people don't travel for a 2 or 3 day conference solely for the content at the panels.
Right.
They're going there for the opportunity to interact with their peers,
right.
to meet some of these experts, to see the exhibition hall, frankly, to have a little bit of a trip away, a junket, whatever.
Yep.
And so how do you, if you're putting on those kind of large scale events, how do you find a way to sort of meet you probably can't meet all of those needs. Certainly you can't meet the junket one, but how do you meet as many of those needs as possible? I think it's a real challenge, and I think we're likely to see a lot less in the way of large scale events and more, where you say, okay, well, look, instead of doing one large annual thing, let's do a series of smaller things that are more focused, that still allow us to generate the revenue and get the information and the exposure and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know what your experience has been with these larger scale events, which I've ragged on quite heavily.
Yeah, I think it depends for sure. There have been probably, I'll go out and say there have been 3 that I have seen done pretty well. I mean, still not at the level that one would expect, but in the big scheme of things, pretty well. And I've noticed a couple of things that they've done. One is that they have asked the speakers, and you, as a speaker, you usually have 45 minutes to an hour. They've asked you to do no more than 20 minutes. They don't do them live. You don't speak live. You record a video, and in some cases, you record that video 2 or 3 times because they want it really results driven, and you can't. When I speak, I tell stories. You don't have time to do that. And right. so you'll turn in the video and they'll send it back and say, this is great. I need you to edit this piece or do this a little bit differently. And so you will do that as a speaker several times. For the producers that are doing it really well, they will give you that feedback and help you get it where they want. And it's no more than 20 minutes. And so then as an attendee, okay, here's the agenda. I want to see this one, and this one, but I'm only spending 60 minutes of my day because I'm seeing those 3 speakers and it's at 1, 3, and 5 or whatever it happens to be. So, you're not sitting in front of your computer all day watching webinars. So I think they've done that really well. And the other thing that I've seen done really well, which I was really skeptical about, but it's been done very well, is a virtual exhibition hall. Mm-hmm. I've seen Legal Marketing Institute or Legal Marketing Association did a really nice job with that. And what they did is they asked the exhibitors to show up at different times of the day. So you're going to be here from 2 to 2:15, no more than that. And then they would invite people to come to your quote unquote booth. And because it was only 10 or 15 people, you got to have conversations with them. And people showed up. It wasn't like they didn't show up. And it was done really well. So, mm-hmm. I mean, I think there are some things that people are getting creative about, and it'll be interesting to see. Like, I just saw that Cannes is virtual this year, so we can all go to Cannes this year if we want. But
which I think is a silly event anyway. But
well, yeah,
whatever.
But you get to see celebrities, so.
Yeah, I don't know. That doesn't excite me that much.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see.
I've seen a lot of celebrities over the years in my travels. Whatever.
I just saw a friend of mine posted on Facebook yesterday. He's in Boston. That George Clooney and Ben Affleck are there shooting a movie, and he has video of George Clooney just screwing around playing baseball. Like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so it'll be interesting to see if large scale events go back to in person entirely, or if there'll be a hybrid, or I don't know. I don't know what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, I think initially I expect a huge momentum for in-person events because people just have this pent-up desire to get out, right? And so I think that there will be a big push, but I think then it sort of starts to be like, okay, first of all, they look at the attendance, and it doesn't meet expectations, because I think there are a lot of people, myself included, who are not eager to get back out there. And
yeah, me too. I'm not eager.
Both for spending time on the road and because I think there are still a lot of unknowns out there. And,
right.
To me, I want to balance everything. And I suspect others may as well. But I think there is certainly some pent up energy out there where people they want to do something. Mm-hmm. But I think that there will be a lot more critical judgments about, is this really worth, 3 or 4 days of my time, travel and everything else all in? Is it worth all of the expense that goes along with it? And I think that's going to put pressure on these events to either up their quality or, find new ways of delivering what they're trying to deliver. And obviously different organizations are doing it for different purposes. Some people it's a revenue generator. Some people it's, for exposure or advocacy or whatever. And so, there's going to have to be some adjustments made. I do agree with you that the exhibition hall type things that are done more in that sort of scheduled, let's come together, we'll talk about what our offering is. You do it sort of in a small Zoom room type thing or something like that. I think those are far more effective. That there are a lot of these really, sort of gimmicky, I think, pass through the exhibit hall in some animated kind of thing on screen. I think, the ones that I've seen done well are the ones similar to what you've described, where it's like, okay, this vendor will be doing a small group presentation at this time. It's very short, and there's that opportunity for interaction. Sort of like what happens in Vegas at CES. If you've ever been to CES, typically a lot of the booths have, every 15 minutes they do a presentation. They just kind of recycle, right? And it's the same sort of thing, except, it's not going on constantly. But, you still just decide proactively, I'm going to show up at this time and hear their spiel, ask my questions, and figure out if it's something useful to me.
Right.
And so much of this is making it as personal as possible for the attendees. And, one of the things that I'm curious about your take on, I've seen a number of events that either say, okay, we're not doing recordings for you at all of these online events, or we're doing them, but you won't get them for like 60 days in order to encourage the real-time in-person participation, right? And I see the merits of that on the one hand, right? Because, if you're expecting that there's just a video of it, there's no motivation to show up on time.
Right.
And so it really does turn it into more of a video series than anything else. On the flip side, I think there's a certain expectation that when it's a virtual event and you're paying to attend or something like that you're going to have access to videos, right? I mean, that's pre-pandemic. That was the more typical thing. If there was a virtual event, you got a recording of it, whether it was a webinar or whatever. And so I wonder what your take is on that, and whether, the relative merits of forcing someone into an in-person engagement versus, providing them with the recordings. So just curious what you think.
It's funny you asked that, because I hadn't really thought about it. But as you're saying this, we still have provided the recordings pretty close to right after, whether or not you attended. I mean, if you registered or paid, you're still getting the recordings whether or not you attended. I don't think we've had anybody wait. In fact, I did marketing profs, and I'm fairly certain they had the recordings available right after.
Yeah, it's really something I've seen just in the last couple of months, but there have been a few events that I've participated in where they had that as their policy, that typically that it was a 60-day wait to get the recording. And
that very well could be they just have to edit and produce, and I don't know.
No, they've explicitly said that it's to encourage,
because they want you to
because they want you to participate, right? They want you to be part of
understand that.
The real-time experience. And so I get that. I don't know. It's one of those ones where I'm torn on it, because I see the value of getting folks to do real-time participation and not simply, buy a video series.
Right.
At the same time, I generally come at things from the perspective of, you want to make the customers happy, and there's no real point to it other than pushing forward your own motivation as opposed to thinking about theirs. Right. I don't know. If it were to do editing or things like that, and it took time, I mean, that's obviously different. But if it's simply to force the real-time participation, I guess I would sort of more be inclined towards just make the videos available.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I mean, because the other thing I saw is that in at least one of these cases, they made the videos available like a week later anyway. They'd said so it was all sort of a marketing attempt to get you to show up in person. But then I suspect either because they were just inundated with requests or they already planned to do it from the beginning. Who knows? But the recordings came out very quickly.
Interesting.
So,
yeah, I don't know.
In any case, we only make recordings of this show available, at least for now. If you want to ever see us do this live, just let us know, and maybe we'll consider it so you can see all of the goofs and gaffes.
All the stuff that happens.
All the stuff that happens. But unfortunately, we've reached the limit of the time available for this recording. So we're going to have to draw this episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast to a close. We've been virtual all along, and we're going to stay that way.
Yes, we are.
We're not doing this in person.
No, we're not.
Maybe one day. Anyway,
maybe.
On that note, I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
And it depends. Thank you for listening to the Agency Leadership Podcast. You can watch or listen to every episode by visiting agencyleadershippodcast.com or subscribing on your favorite podcast player. We would also love it if you would leave a rating or review at iTunes or wherever you go to find podcasts. Be sure to check out Gini Dietrich at spinsucks.com and join the SpinSucks community at spinsucks.com/spin-sucks-community. You can learn more about me, Chip Griffin, at small-agency-growth.com, where you can also sign up for a free community membership to engage with other agency leaders. The Agency Leadership Podcast is distributed on the FIR Podcast Network, where you can find lots of other communications-oriented podcasts. Just visit www.firpodcastnetwork.com. We welcome your feedback and suggestions and look forward to being back with you again next week.